In a world obsessed with talking, explaining, and proving ourselves, we often overlook the most powerful tool available to us: silence. We've been taught that speaking up, asserting our opinions, and broadcasting our thoughts are the keys to influence and respect. But what if the opposite were true? What if the most potent form of control, the kind that shapes perception, commands attention, and manipulates outcomes, doesn't come from words at all, but from strategic silence? Silence is not merely the absence of sound. It's a weapon, a shield, and a mirror, all at once. Those who master it understand the invisible currents of human behavior, using quiet as a form of leverage, an invisible authority that others can sense but rarely anticipate. Throughout history, thinkers like Machiavelli have explored the unspoken rules of power. He understood that influence is not always gained by persuasion or charisma, but by presence, restraint, and calculated inaction. In a room full of chatter and competition, the one who speaks least often controls the narrative. Silence forces others to reveal their intentions, exposes weaknesses, and creates an aura of unpredictability that commands respect. It's a subtle form of dominance that bypasses overt confrontation, allowing the observant and strategic to outmaneuver even the most vocal rivals. This video will take you beyond conventional advice about leadership and communication. You will discover why staying silent at the right moment can amplify your power, strengthen your influence, and protect you from manipulation. From understanding how others perceive you to mastering the psychological mechanics of restraint, you will learn strategies that transform quiet observation into active control. By the end, silence won't feel passive. It will feel like a deliberate, unstoppable force, shaping your world in ways words could never achieve.
Most people believe that talking is power, that filling the room with their opinions, explanations, or stories somehow establishes authority. Yet, in reality, excessive speech often signals insecurity, not strength. The more someone speaks, the more they reveal about their desires, fears, and weaknesses. Oversharing creates openings for others to exploit, and impulsive words can ignite conflicts that could have been avoided. Human nature craves patterns, and when people talk too much, they paint a clear map of their mind, their habits, and their priorities. Every unguarded word is a breadcrumb for the perceptive observer. Consider the countless moments when someone tried to defend themselves by explaining their actions, only to find themselves trapped further in misunderstanding. Explanation rarely guarantees clarity. It often invites judgment. Over-explaining is a silent surrender, an unintentional admission that the person speaking is not fully in control. This is where strategic silence comes into play. Silence is not emptiness, it is calculated influence. It conveys confidence, composure, and control. The absence of words forces others to fill the gaps, often projecting assumptions, biases, or fears that work in your favor. Machiavelli understood this deeply. He recognized that measured communication is a tool of mastery, not mere etiquette. Leaders who spoke sparingly were perceived as deliberate, intelligent, and untouchable. Those who disclosed their thoughts in full often became vulnerable to manipulation. Silence, in Machiavellian terms, is both shield and sword. It protects your intentions while shaping the perceptions of others. In essence, the less you reveal, the more power you hold. Every word should be purposeful, every pause intentional. Contrast this with the habitual chatter of the unprepared. People often speak to fill silence, to assert dominance, or to win favor. Ironically, this produces the opposite effect. They appear reactive, unsteady, and predictable. Others can anticipate their next move, exploit their visible anxieties, and manipulate outcomes with ease. In social and professional arenas alike, Those who talk excessively frequently find themselves outmaneuvered by those who understand the subtle authority of restraint. Strategic silence is not merely the absence of speech. It is a performance of control. It forces listeners to engage, to question, to wonder, and ultimately to follow your cues without realizing it. In this way, measured communication becomes a form of psychological leverage. Machiavelli's perspective teaches that influence is not about dominating conversation, but about orchestrating perception. Those who master the art of silence create a gap between appearance and intention, a space where power quietly accumulates. By restraining impulse and choosing words carefully, individuals cultivate an aura of authority. Speech loses its ordinary function and transforms into a precise instrument. Every statement carries weight. Every pause amplifies impact. The illusion of constant dialogue fades, replaced by strategic restraint that commands respect, instills curiosity, and solidifies influence. Mastering this balance is fundamental to understanding why silence can, in truth, be more powerful than words.
Silence is not emptiness. It is a tool, a weapon, and a shield all at once. While the world rewards those who speak loudly and frequently, true power often lies in what is left unsaid. People rush to fill gaps with words, believing that communication equals influence. Yet, history repeatedly shows that those who master restraint wield control over perception itself. Consider leaders like Abraham Lincoln, who carefully measured every statement, or Machiavelli's own advice to princes. A wise leader speaks less, observes more, and lets others reveal their intentions first. Psychologically, restraint taps into the human tendency to overvalue scarcity. When someone rarely speaks, every word carries weight. Listeners unconsciously assign meaning, significance, and authority to silence. It forces them to pay attention, to anticipate, and to respect the space between statements. Contrast this with individuals who overshare. When words are abundant, meaning dilutes. People stop listening, assumptions are formed without depth, and control over the narrative is lost. Over-explanation signals insecurity. Impulsiveness exposes vulnerabilities. In the arena of influence, these are mistakes that predators exploit. Historical examples reinforce this principle. During the negotiations leading to the Treaty of Versailles, diplomats who spoke sparingly held the room. They asked questions, listened, and allowed others to reveal their weaknesses. Their silence became a strategic advantage, turning the power balance subtly yet decisively. Similarly, in courts, business boardrooms, and political arenas, those who speak less often dictate more. Their pauses, their measured responses, and their calm demeanor convey authority far more effectively than words alone. Silence, in essence, becomes a language of control. The psychological impact of restraint extends to interpersonal relationships as well. When someone remains calm and silent in the face of provocation, it creates discomfort in others. Impulsive reactions are predictable. Measured responses are not. By controlling one's expression, one forces the environment to adapt, to reveal, and to negotiate on your terms. Machiavelli emphasized this repeatedly. Let others act, speak, and stumble, while you remain composed. The one who holds back often emerges as the unseen force guiding outcomes. Restraint also shapes perception in profound ways. People naturally interpret quietness as confidence, wisdom, and authority. They assume that someone who speaks selectively must be calculating, knowledgeable, or in command of unseen forces. Contrast this with those who dominate conversations with constant input,
loud, visible, yet surprisingly powerless. In a world obsessed with noise, silence becomes a rare commodity and therefore a strategic advantage. Ultimately, power in restraint is about timing, observation, and selective engagement. It is about understanding that words, when overused, lose potency, and silence, when wielded deliberately, amplifies it. By mastering when to speak, when to pause, and when to observe, one creates an aura of control, magnetism, and authority. Silence becomes not a void, but a presence, a force that shapes perception, commands attention, and subtly dictates the flow of interactions. Those who understand this principle can manipulate perception without deception, influence without coercion, and maintain control without confrontation. Restraint is the hidden lever behind every decisive leader, the quiet hand guiding strategy, and the invisible armor protecting true power. In learning to speak less, one achieves more. In mastering silence, one masters influence.
True power often lies not in what is spoken, but in what is observed. While many rush to display knowledge, make arguments, or assert dominance through words, those who remain silent gain access to insights unavailable to the talkative. Silence is a lens, a tool for reading human behavior with precision. Every word spoken by others, every gesture, every fleeting expression becomes data when you choose to listen rather than speak. Machiavelli understood this intuitively. The shrewd leader watches first, gathers intelligence, and allows others to reveal their weaknesses without ever disclosing their own intentions. Talking is easy. Observing is difficult. Yet the contrast is striking. Words reveal. Every sentence spoken carries intention, bias, and vulnerability. Impulsive remarks betray insecurities. Over-explaining exposes motivations. Talking too much broadcasts your plans and gives adversaries the ammunition to manipulate or undermine you. Silence, on the other hand, conceals. It keeps your strategy hidden, your mindset unreadable, and your influence undetectable. In any social, political, or corporate battlefield, the quiet observer holds an advantage that the loud cannot match: knowledge without exposure. Psychologically, observing while silent exploits a fundamental aspect of human behavior. People disclose far more than they intend when they perceive no immediate threat. They relax, argue, vent frustrations, and reveal ambitions, all while believing the observer remains disengaged. This information is gold. It allows you to anticipate moves, identify leverage points, and prepare strategies that others cannot foresee. The silent observer is effectively invisible, yet omnipresent, capable of shaping outcomes indirectly by understanding the motivations driving each actor. Contrast framing reinforces the lesson. Those who dominate conversation often remain blind to subtle dynamics, while the silent observer perceives the entire landscape. Talkative individuals become predictable because they reveal too much. The quiet individual remains unpredictable, elusive, and formidable. Every pause is a probe, every reaction measured. Silence transforms into a mirror, reflecting others' true intentions and vulnerabilities. By holding your thoughts, you compel others to fill the void, often unwittingly exposing themselves. Observing while silent also builds a strategic advantage in negotiation and conflict. In disputes, the one who speaks less forces the other to make concessions, disclose priorities, or overplay their hand. In social influence, listening without replying allows you to gather insight into alliances, rivalries, and hidden tensions. Machiavelli emphasized this repeatedly. The wise leader is always learning, absorbing and calculating, not broadcasting every thought. Knowledge without revelation becomes a weapon. Ultimately, the art of observing while silent requires discipline, patience, and strategic intent. It demands restraint from the instinct to react, to comment, or to display intelligence prematurely. The observer's strength lies in the combination of invisibility and awareness. Silence is not passivity, it is active engagement through watchfulness, comprehension, and anticipation. Those who master it can anticipate threats, exploit opportunities, and navigate complex social landscapes with precision. By learning to observe while remaining silent, you harness a power far beyond words. You see what others cannot see, understand what they hide, and act at the precise moment to shape outcomes in your favor. The silent observer is untouchable, informed, and always several steps ahead. In the world where talk often masquerades as action, restraint becomes dominance, invisibility becomes influence, and silence becomes the ultimate weapon.
Silence is more than absence of words. It is a calculated, strategic tool that can shift power dynamics in your favor. While most people speak impulsively, reactively, or excessively, those who master silence wield influence in ways that are subtle yet devastatingly effective. Machiavelli understood that controlling information and perception was far more powerful than any display of force or eloquence. Words, when poorly timed, reveal your intentions, expose vulnerabilities, and give others opportunities to manipulate or outmaneuver you. Silence, by contrast, obscures your inner workings, forcing others to guess, project, and even betray themselves in their assumptions about you. Consider practical applications. In negotiation, when a deal is on the table, the instinct to fill pauses with explanations, justifications, or concessions is common. Yet the person who remains silent gains control. Each pause forces the other party to speak first, to reveal priorities, fears, and hidden desires. Silence creates discomfort. Humans instinctively fear the unknown and strive to resolve ambiguity. By simply withholding your own words, you compel the other side to overcommit, over-explain, or disclose information they would otherwise conceal. Calculated inaction becomes a weapon, a psychological lever that bends circumstances to your advantage without overt aggression. Contrast this with reactive speech. When you respond immediately, you surrender control over the narrative. Your reactions, however measured you intend them to be, communicate emotion, urgency, or weakness. Others exploit these cues, shaping their strategies around your predictable responses. In social interactions, impulsive chatter can make you appear transparent, vulnerable, or desperate for approval. Conversely, silence projects strength, confidence, and unpredictability. It signals that you are self-contained, unshakable, and not driven by external validation. Others begin to fill the silence, often revealing information you can later leverage. In professional environments, silence can be a tactical advantage. Meetings, negotiations, and corporate discussions are full of subtle power plays. Those who speak less can observe the dynamics of influence. Who aligns with whom? Who hesitates? Who seeks approval? And who drives agendas? Remaining unreadable allows you to make decisions with full awareness of the underlying currents, while the overly vocal expose themselves to scrutiny, misinterpretation, or manipulation. Strategic silence lets you set the pace of conversations and control outcomes indirectly. The psychological impact of silence is profound. Human brains are wired to respond to gaps in communication. Unanswered questions, withheld opinions, or measured pauses create tension, curiosity, and sometimes unease. When you remain unreadable,
Others project intentions onto you, often misjudging your position or capabilities. This uncertainty generates influence. People act cautiously, reveal more than necessary, and may even defer to your judgment because they perceive your silence as a sign of calculated mastery. The contrast between their reactive words and your controlled inaction magnifies your authority. Historical examples reinforce this principle. Leaders who mastered the art of silence, from ancient generals to modern strategists, frequently manipulated outcomes without overt displays of power. Julius Caesar, in negotiations with political rivals, often listened and observed for extended periods before speaking. His silence created anticipation, anxiety, and a subtle pressure that forced adversaries to reveal their true intentions. In modern diplomacy and business, similar patterns emerge. Those who speak less than their peers often gain the upper hand, influencing decisions without ever appearing aggressive.
Using silence as a weapon requires deliberate discipline. It is not passive avoidance, but strategic timing. It demands emotional control, situational awareness, and a deep understanding of human psychology. You must know when to remain silent, when to speak, and when to allow others to fill the gaps. Every word withheld is a calculated choice. Every pause is a signal. You control perception not by force, but by ambiguity. You turn absence into leverage, unpredictability into influence, and invisibility into dominance. Contrast framing is essential here. While reactive speakers give away energy, information, and authority, those who wield silence accumulate power, shape perception, and control the flow of interaction. In social, professional, or personal contexts, silence allows you to dictate terms without stating them, command attention without demanding it, and influence outcomes without overtly asserting control. The unreadable individual becomes a force others subconsciously accommodate, fearing missteps or miscalculations that might trigger consequences they cannot predict. Ultimately, silence is not simply golden, it is lethal when understood and applied. It transforms the ordinary into strategic advantage, the passive into power, and the unnoticed into influential. Mastering silence requires patience, observation, and restraint, but it rewards the practitioner with unmatched authority, psychological leverage, and the ability to act decisively when others are still revealing themselves. By remaining unreadable, you compel others to expose themselves, creating opportunities that talk could never manufacture. Silence, in the hands of the strategic, becomes the ultimate weapon, quiet, invisible, and undeniably effective.
Perception is reality. Few concepts are as critical in the pursuit of influence as the way others perceive you. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. People rarely act on truth. They act on the images, impressions, and narratives they believe about others. Silence is one of the most potent tools for shaping that perception. By deliberately choosing what to reveal, when to speak, and when to withhold, you create an aura of control, mystery, and authority that commands attention without effort. The first step in managing perception through silence is understanding human bias. People are naturally drawn to fill gaps in information with their assumptions. When you remain unreadable, others project meaning, intentions, and power onto you, often exaggerating your capabilities or strategic foresight. Contrast this with those who over-communicate, spilling every thought, explaining every decision, and justifying every action. In doing so, they surrender control over how they are seen, Their image becomes malleable in the hands of others, vulnerable to misinterpretation, gossip, or exploitation. Silence, conversely, forces others to interpret your actions within the framework you allow, giving you indirect control over their conclusions. Machiavelli's insight was clear. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you are. The mastery of silence allows you to cultivate the appearance of wisdom, confidence, and dominance, even if your inner strategies are hidden. By speaking sparingly, you ensure that each word carries weight, each statement is noticed, and each action is scrutinized. This selective communication creates a sense of gravity around your presence. People become attuned to your words not because you speak constantly, but because when you do speak, your words are deliberate, meaningful, and rare. Silence also cultivates mystique. Mystery is magnetic. It draws attention, invites curiosity, and encourages respect. When others cannot predict your thoughts or anticipate your reactions, you elevate your perceived power. Contrast this with the predictable individual who reacts immediately to every provocation. They appear transparent, even weak, and their influence diminishes. Those who remain unreadable, however, compel others to pause, analyze, and often hesitate before acting. Silence transforms you into an enigma, a figure whose intentions are debated and whose moves are anticipated with caution. This controlled ambiguity is a subtle form of dominance that many fail to recognize, but it shapes perception more effectively than any display of force. Practical examples abound. In leadership, managers who speak sparingly often gain more authority than those who constantly explain themselves. Teams notice their selective communication and attribute competence, decisiveness, and foresight to them, even if the reality is more nuanced. In social interactions, the individual who listens more than they talk becomes a silent arbiter of attention. Their presence alone signals importance. Their limited words become a measure of influence. By remaining quiet, they allow others to reveal intentions, desires, and weaknesses, information that can later be leveraged strategically.
The psychological effects of silence on perception are profound. Humans equate silence with deliberation, control, and confidence. When a person does not react impulsively, they are subconsciously assumed to possess self-mastery and insight. Conversely, reactive speech signals uncertainty, vulnerability, and lack of control. Silence creates the illusion of power because it implies that you are always aware, always evaluating, and always several steps ahead. Others, fearing the unknown, adjust their behavior to avoid missteps, effectively reinforcing your authority without your saying a single word. Machiavellian contrast is key. While those who over-explain are trapped in their own narratives, the silent strategist allows perception to become a weapon. By controlling appearances and managing what others know or think they know, you shape their decisions, interactions, and judgments. Your silence becomes a lens through which all interpretation passes, giving you subtle but undeniable influence over outcomes. People behave differently around those who command perception, often deferring, seeking approval, or second-guessing themselves simply because they cannot predict your next move. Mastering perception through silence requires discipline and intention. It is not passive avoidance, but deliberate orchestration. Every pause, every withheld comment, every carefully chosen word is a brushstroke on the canvas of your image. By controlling what others see, you create an identity that aligns with power, competence, and authority. You build mystique, protect your strategies, and influence behavior,
all without overt displays of force. Ultimately, silence in the service of perception is the art of indirect control. Words are finite, but the impression of thoughtfulness, composure, and strategic mastery is infinite. By remaining unreadable, you force others to interpret, speculate, and defer to your presence. Contrast this with the over-communicator, whose every word diminishes their power. The silent strategist, on the other hand, ensures that perception remains firmly in their hands, turning ambiguity into authority, restraint into respect, and quiet into dominance. The world judges by appearances, and when you control those appearances, you control the game.
Silence is powerful, but only when wielded with precision. Left unchecked or applied without strategy, it can erode credibility, breed misunderstanding, and even signal weakness. Many overestimate the effectiveness of quietness, assuming that simply not speaking is a mark of wisdom or control. The truth is more nuanced. Silence, like any tool, has its proper context, and failing to recognize that context can turn your greatest strength into a liability. Consider the reactive silence of those who withhold input out of fear rather than strategy. In professional settings, staying quiet when important decisions demand contribution can create the perception of incompetence. Colleagues may assume you lack insight, initiative, or authority, undermining the very influence you sought to preserve. Similarly, in social or negotiation scenarios, failing to clarify intentions or respond when necessary can breed frustration, suspicion, or resentment. Silence without purpose communicates uncertainty as often as it communicates power. Contrast this with strategic silence, the deliberate pauses that compel attention and enhance authority. The difference lies in timing and intent. Strategic silence amplifies the impact of your words when they are finally spoken, creating suspense, authority, and a sense of control. Excessive silence, however, leaves others filling gaps with assumptions, and those assumptions are not always flattering. People may misinterpret your restraint as disengagement, arrogance, or indecision. The silent strategist avoids these pitfalls by understanding the precise moments when speech strengthens influence and when quiet consolidates it.
Machiavelli himself emphasized the importance of discernment. Appearances matter, but they must be carefully curated. Silence that isolates rather than commands creates a vacuum in perception, one that others readily occupy with their own narratives. Too little communication can make allies question loyalty, collaborators doubt competence, and opponents underestimate or dismiss you entirely. Conversely, excessive talking dilutes authority, reveals vulnerabilities, and allows others to predict your strategies. The challenge, then, is to calibrate silence as a complement to communication, not as a substitute for it. Practical balance requires situational awareness. Ask, is speaking essential to prevent misinterpretation or to assert influence? Will remaining quiet enhance anticipation or create confusion? Silence is not passive, it is a measured tactic. For example, during negotiations, waiting before responding can elicit concessions, reveal the other party's intentions, or establish psychological dominance. In leadership, listening more than speaking demonstrates confidence, encourages openness, and positions you as a calculated observer rather than an impulsive participant. Conversely, silence at the wrong moment, during critical announcements, debates, or moments demanding clarity, can be perceived as avoidance, weakness, or indecision. The contrast is clear. Silence amplifies power only when paired with context and precision. It must never be reflexive or habitual without awareness. The audience, whether colleagues, allies, or adversaries, must feel that your silence is intentional, a mark of control rather than hesitation. By understanding when to break it and when to maintain it, you transform potential pitfalls into strategic advantage. Poorly timed silence harms perception. Expertly applied silence builds it. In essence, silence is a double-edged sword. Misapplied, it invites misunderstanding and undermines authority. Mastered, it shapes perception, heightens influence, and establishes dominance. The lesson is simple but critical. Know the terrain before you choose quiet, and speak only when your words will resonate with the authority and precision your silence has prepared.
Silence is more than an external tactic. It is a reflection of internal mastery. The power of remaining quiet is amplified exponentially when paired with self-discipline, emotional control, and acute self-awareness. Without this inner foundation, silence risks becoming empty, performative, or even counterproductive. The greatest practitioners of strategic quietness, historical leaders, negotiators, and Machiavellian tacticians alike, knew that external influence always mirrors internal strength. To harness silence as a tool, you must first cultivate command over your own mind. Emotional control is the cornerstone. Every instinct to over-explain, defend, or react stems from untrained emotion. When anger flares, impatience rises, or fear constrains judgment, words spill without strategy. Silence is only effective when it emerges from choice, not compulsion. Consider a leader navigating a tense negotiation. The impulse may be to justify, clarify, or assert dominance through speech. Yet the quiet observer gains far more. By controlling emotional responses, they absorb information, detect subtle cues, and respond with precision when the moment truly demands it. The contrast is stark. Reactive speech exposes vulnerability, while disciplined quiet projects authority.
Patience is equally critical. Strategic silence is a test of endurance, a challenge to the natural urge for immediate gratification. It requires resisting the temptation to fill voids with words and to allow situations to unfold. Historical examples abound. Generals who waited for the enemy to reveal weakness, diplomats who allowed tension to peak before making concessions, and leaders who let crises simmer while maintaining composure. All demonstrate the power of patience in amplifying influence. Silence is a signal that you are unshakable, that your authority is not dependent on instant reaction, but on calculated observation. Self-awareness transforms silence from a mere habit into a tool of influence. Awareness of your triggers, tendencies, and psychological patterns ensures that quietness serves strategy rather than ego. Reflective exercises, journaling, mindfulness, or situational analysis cultivate insight into when your silence strengthens perception and when it may backfire. By understanding your internal states, you can choose precisely when to remain quiet and when to assert influence verbally, creating a rhythm of control that others find compelling yet unpredictable. Practical exercises for the audience can solidify internal mastery. Begin with controlled observation. Spend a day consciously limiting speech in meetings or social interactions, noting the reactions of others. Practice delaying responses to emotionally charged messages, observing how restraint changes the dynamics. Develop internal dialogue to replace impulsive verbal expression, allowing thoughts to mature before manifesting externally. Each exercise reinforces the mental scaffolding that supports the outward projection of silence.
Contrast framing deepens the lesson. External silence without internal discipline is hollow, a mask that will eventually crack. The undisciplined silent person risks being misunderstood, ignored, or perceived as aloof. The internally mastered silent person, however, radiates calm, authority, and intentionality. Every pause becomes a statement. Every withheld word reinforces presence. Every observation becomes actionable intelligence. The audience learns that silence is not passive. It is an active demonstration of control over self and situation. Internal mastery also aligns with Machiavelli's philosophy. Authority and influence are earned through strategic action, not emotion-driven reaction. Those who cannot govern their own impulses are easily manipulated. By cultivating patience, emotional regulation, and self-awareness, silence becomes a weapon, a shield, and a beacon of unshakable power. It is in this intersection of internal discipline and external restraint that true influence resides. Ultimately, silence is only as powerful as the mind behind it. External tactics are temporary. Internal mastery endures. Strengthen your emotions, sharpen your patience, and heighten self-awareness, and the quiet you project will resonate with authority, command respect, and leave others guessing, not because you withhold information out of fear, but because you choose deliberately to reveal only
To truly
what serves your
understand the
strategy.
hidden power of silence, we must examine it in action, through history, through modern power dynamics, and through real-life scenarios where quiet calculation outweighed words. Silence is not merely absence, it is strategy in motion, a deliberate choice that shapes perception, reveals insight, and commands respect. Consider the legendary strategist Niccolò Machiavelli himself. In his observations of Renaissance politics, he noted that rulers who mastered the art of measured speech, subtle observation, and strategic quietness often prevailed over those who relied solely on eloquence or charm. Machiavelli recounts leaders who, by speaking less and observing more, were able to anticipate betrayal, manipulate alliances, and maintain control over both friend and foe. Their silence was not a passive trait, but a tool of active influence, a psychological lever that shaped perception and dictated outcomes. Contrast this with those who over-explained or reacted impulsively. In court politics, a noble who answered every accusation or defended every decision verbally often revealed more than intended. Every word became ammunition for opponents, every explanation a crack in the armor of authority. Silence, in contrast, projected composure. It created a sense of unassailable presence. Observers filled in the gaps themselves, often attributing wisdom, strategy, or omniscience to those who said little. The lesson is clear. Measured silence is an amplifier of perceived power, while excessive speech is a magnifier of vulnerability.
History provides countless examples beyond Machiavelli. Consider Abraham Lincoln during tense debates and wartime decisions. His deliberate pauses, thoughtful responses, and careful restraint in communication allowed him to observe opponents, gauge public sentiment, and craft influence without appearing reactive. Opponents often misjudged his intentions, only to find themselves strategically outmaneuvered. Similarly, Winston Churchill was known for knowing when to speak and when to withhold comment. His pauses in Parliament and carefully measured speeches reinforced authority and conveyed gravitas, proving that silence in the right context can be a formidable instrument of leadership. Modern power dynamics offer parallel insights.
In corporate boardrooms, executives who dominate conversations are often noticed, but those who listen, analyze, and respond with precision leave a lasting impact. The silent observer becomes the influencer behind the scenes, able to identify weaknesses in competitors, understand the true motivations of colleagues, and strategically intervene at the moment of greatest effect. Silence creates leverage because it forces others to reveal themselves. By withholding reaction, leaders compel their peers to act first, exposing their strategies, desires, and limitations. This principle applies to negotiations, team dynamics, and high-stakes decision-making. Real-life case studies reinforce the same truth. In high-stakes negotiations, a deal-maker who speaks too quickly or over-explains loses bargaining power. In contrast, the silent counterpart who listens, calculates, and interjects only when necessary often secures superior terms. Political advisors who remain in the shadows, observing discussions and noting reactions, frequently wield influence far beyond their visibility. In social interactions, the individual who reacts impulsively to criticism or confrontation cedes psychological advantage, while the one who responds with controlled silence asserts dominance without overt aggression.
Contrast framing is critical in understanding these examples. Speaking without strategy exposes vulnerability. Silence with mastery conceals it. One reveals, the other observes. One becomes predictable, the other unreadable. The audience can see the pattern. Silence magnifies authority, cultivates mystique, and forces others to act on your terms. It is a psychological weapon, subtle yet devastatingly effective. The practical takeaway is actionable. Viewers are encouraged to study the behavior of historical figures and modern power players. Note how pauses, restraint, and selective speech shifted outcomes. Apply these insights to personal and professional life. Listen more than you speak. Observe patterns of behavior and use silence deliberately to create influence. Recognize the contrast between those who react impulsively and those who control the narrative through calculated quietness. Ultimately, these case studies reveal a timeless principle. Mastery of silence is mastery of power. Words are fleeting, but the impression left by strategic quietness endures. By learning from leaders, negotiators, and historical tacticians, the audience understands that silence is not weakness. It is authority, control, and strategy distilled into a single, deliberate choice. The moments you choose not to speak often speak the loudest. As we reach the end of this exploration into the hidden power of silence, the lesson is clear. Words can liberate, but they can also bind. Most people fail because they speak too much, revealing their strategies, emotions, and vulnerabilities before the moment demands it. They react impulsively, over-explain, or seek validation in every conversation, leaving themselves exposed to manipulation, misunderstanding, and lost influence. In contrast, those who master silence, strategically, deliberately, hold authority that transcends mere speech. They are untouchable, not because they dominate with words, but because they command attention and respect through restraint. Silence is a mirror and a weapon. It allows you to observe without interference, to gather insight without revealing your hand, and to project control without aggression. History and modern examples alike show that leaders, negotiators, and influencers who embrace calculated quietness are able to shape perception, anticipate moves, and assert influence far beyond what their words alone could achieve. Machiavelli understood this principle centuries ago, recognizing that power is often invisible, subtle,
and concealed behind the art of measured restraint. But mastery is not passive. Silence must be purposeful. It must be aligned with observation, strategy, and internal discipline. Emotional control amplifies its effect. Awareness of others' motives transforms quiet into leverage, and self-restraint ensures that each word spoken carries weight, while each pause projects strength. By implementing these strategies, you no longer react to the world, you guide it. You influence outcomes, shape perceptions, and command respect in ways those who speak first, fastest, and loudest never can.
Now, it is your turn. Observe your environment before responding. Measure your words. Use silence not as avoidance, but as precision. Let others reveal themselves while you maintain control. Apply these principles in negotiations, in social interactions, in leadership, and in personal relationships. The path to becoming untouchable begins with restraint, clarity, and calculated observation. Remember this contrast. Speaking too much exposes weakness. Strategic silence conceals power. Most fail because they give away too much. Few succeed because they master the invisible forces that govern influence. By embracing the lessons shared in this guide, you are stepping into the ranks of the rare few who understand the true mechanics of power. Take action now. Implement these strategies. Let silence speak louder than words ever could. Become untouchable.